And then I think, unfortunately, a significant loss to clean athletes and the World Anti-Doping Agency and the global system that is supposed to be here to protect athletes' rights.
And Australia's cricketers have made an excellent start to day 2 of the opening test in Adelaide because India are all out for 244 in their first innings, losing their last 4 wickets really cheaply this morning.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live on digital, BBC Sounds, smart speaker and online.
Good morning. Our spell of mild and unsettled mid-December weather is set to continue. Over the next 24 hours, we're going to see more rain moving in from the west, bringing a risk of flooding in places, particularly for South Wales, where the Met Office have issued an amber weather warning for heavy rain that's valid from 9 a.m. this morning right through the course of today. So let's start off with today's forecast across all of Wales, the western half of England, into the southwest of Scotland too. Well, this morning is cloudy and breezy, but we're going to see an area of rain pushing in from the southwest, moving across the whole region by about midday. This rain is going to be heavy at times, about 20 to 30 millimetres quite widely, so enough to cause flooding and travel disruption, especially for South Wales, where there could be 100 millimetres of rain over the highest ground. The winds are also going to be a feature, with gusts up to 60 miles per hour around exposed coasts, and it's going to be another very mild day with top temperatures 13 or 14 degrees. Across the eastern half of England and for northern and eastern Scotland, well, today starts with some drizzly showers in the southeast, which should fade away to leave a lot of dry weather. There will be a few breaks in the cloud, and it's going to be a breezy day with gusts of 40 miles per hour. There'll be some patchy outbreaks of rain arriving during this afternoon and lasting into the evening as well, and it's another mild day with temperatures of 14 or even 15 degrees. Now, lastly, today's weather for Northern Ireland, where we're going to see a cloudy, showery and blustery morning. Later on this afternoon, there'll be some drier and some brighter weather developing, with perhaps a few sunnier spells and a couple of showers as well. Top temperatures today in Belfast around 13 Celsius. And the outlook for the weekend is a mix of sunny spells and scattered blustery showers and a slightly cooler feel to the weather. I'm Sarah Keith-Lucas, 5 Live Weather.
5 Live Breakfast.
I'm getting the jingle, jingle, tingle bells jingle when you remembering when I was a kid, the excitement of an advent calendar with all little sparkly things on it.
Yeah, and that was enough in those days, a little picture, wasn't it?
Yeah, little Robin.
I always like the kind of random pictures you get behind the windows on picture advent calendars, like, you know, the traditional Christmas nativity squirrel. This one here, my wonderful husband bought me a Japanese whiskey advent calendar, so not any old whiskey advent calendar.
There's bits of whiskey in it then?
Yeah,
whiskey.
little bottles of
little
whiskey.
Pots. Oh.
Lauren Oxted says, gin for me, beer for the hubby, biscuits for the dog. Kiddies get something different every day. Today was Christmas face masks to get to wear to school. This wins it for me. I give you the 24 days of Scampy Fries advent calendar from Ian and Toby. I absolutely love it. Thank you, Ian and Toby.
I'm going to text you a picture on Christmas Day of my West Highland Terriers in their Santa costumes.
This from Elaine in Surrey. All the best to you all on breakfast. Thank you, Elaine in Surrey.
5 Live Breakfast, weekday mornings from 6. This is BBC 5 Live, available on the BBC Sounds app with Dotun Adebayo.
No, Barbara didn't do a stupid thing, says Rose in Devon. Talking about Barbara, who called us up and told us about the dumb thing in love that she did. Gave up everything for the love that she followed to Wales and ended up on her own, having lost everything. Anyway, Rose in Devon says, no, she didn't do a stupid thing. The relationship seemed strong and secure. How could she have known he would suddenly change? It was perfectly sensible and natural to make the commitment that she did. Barbara didn't have a crystal ball. I know, Rose, I agree with you, to be honest, but Barbara says she did a dumb thing and she wouldn't do it again. That was the point I was making, and that was the point that she made. Upper class people are referred to as posh people, and posh people are people who sailed on ships and wanted the sun in their cabin for both legs of the journey, port outward and starboard home. Says our listener, that's posh for you, that's upper class. We've been talking about upper class as well. What class you think you are in? Would you say that Edward and Mrs. Simpson were of the same class? Or that King giving up his throne if England were any good at football, why is it 54 years since they won the World Cup? I have no answer to that, Jock. We're not even talking about that tonight, but fair enough. I'm not going to ask about any other country who may not have won the World Cup. I wouldn't dare, you know me. Feel free to text me on 85058 or email Dotun, DOTUN @bbc.co.uk. Northern Ireland is being put into a 6-week strict lockdown starting on Boxing Day. Non-essential shops will have to close, as will hairdressers and beauty salons. Pubs and restaurants can only do takeaways, but 3 households can still mix over Christmas. Our Ireland correspondent is Emma Vardy.
A lot of people were expecting more restrictions in the new year, but I think this really is a shock because it goes further and is going to be a lot stricter than people would have realised. Now, the situation in Northern Ireland at the moment has been described as dire. Previous periods of restrictions that have come and gone, ministers just don't believe that they have had enough of an impact. So when this all kicks in again on Boxing Day, we will see once again hospitality and non-essential retail closing. But on top of that, this time even stricter measures. For the first week, people will be asked to not to leave their homes between 8 o'clock at night and 6 o'clock in the morning. And even those essential shops that are staying open will be asked to close at 8 o'clock at night. And no sporting events will be allowed to take place, even those at elite level. For now, though, schools are remaining open, but ministers are looking at possible limitations, things like staggering classes. Now, the Deputy First Minister, Michelle O'Neill, said, look, she knows these measures will be seen as draconian, but warned that the health service could be crushed in the new year if this didn't go ahead now. Bubbling arrangements will continue over Christmas, but look, almost as soon as the last piece of turkey is eaten, it's going to be straight back to lockdown.
Yeah, Emma Vardy there. Meanwhile, talks between the UK government and the EU's negotiators will continue today in Brussels. On Thursday evening, the Prime Minister, Mr Johnson, warned that time was short and that a no-deal scenario was very likely unless the EU position changed substantially. Our political correspondent Chris Mason told me the latest on the new deadline.
The European Parliament, Dotton, is saying that there's a new deadline. I mean, dear me, deadlines and Brexit, we know where that story ends up. So the European Parliament say, let's see a deal by Sunday, because that'll give enough time for the European side and the UK side to ratify, to sign on the dotted line and agree to any deal that the negotiators arrive at. On the UK government side, speaking to them in the last few hours, they say, well, we don't really buy that as a deadline. The scope for things to go on a bit longer than that if needs be. But I think what's really striking, Dotton, is that there's been this call last night between the Prime Minister and Ursula von der Leyen of the European Commission, and the last couple of times they've got together, either remotely or physically, they've issued a joint statement afterwards. This time they put out their own statement, and it's quite easy to disentangle why. That the European Union sounding relatively optimistic, if you are of the view that a deal would be a good idea. We welcome substantial progress on many issues, the statement said, acknowledging though that there are still big differences. The Downing Street readout, as these things are called, after the phone call, was notably more downbeat, talking about a serious situation and time is short and there are differences on the so-called to it, to leave on what he describes as Australian-style terms, which is a Downing Street euphemism for no deal.
How can we reconcile those two positions? On the one hand, Ursula von der Leyen, as you say, optimistic that substantial progress has been made on many issues, and Downing Street saying, well, no, the EU hasn't changed its position substantially on the issues that matter. How can we reconcile that?
I think on the facts there isn't a disagreement. On the tone there is. So there has been, I think both sides acknowledge, progress. It's progress sufficient for the European Union side to commit to the text of their readout of the phone call, and the UK, I guess when you read their statement and you read a later tweet by Lord Frost, the UK's chief negotiator, that the situation is very serious and progress seems blocked, it's impossible not to conclude a more gloomy outlook from the UK side as far as those who want to see a deal done is concerned. There's real nervousness, Dotton, on top of the whole issue of fisheries on the UK side, about so-called state aid. This is the capacity for a government or a state player to throw money at an industry that it wants to support, either to prop it up or to turbocharge it. And the UK is really nervous about an EU idea that's relatively new. It's only popped up, they say, in the last couple of weeks, whereby state aid would be exempt from the deal if on the EU side it basically had a European Union flag on it. In other words, if it was provided by the centre, by Brussels, rather than by a member state. And as far as the UK is concerned, that's totally unfair if it is, to use the words of someone I spoke to this evening or last night, asymmetric. In other words, they can do it because it's badged as EU, but we can't do it because it would be badged as British, and they see that as totally unreasonable. So I think the thing is, Dotun, whilst we feel that we've seen this playbook, this pantomime, if you like, it's far more serious than that word would imply, but this kind of act play out where there's negotiations and various deadlines bite the dust, and then, hey presto, right at the end, a rabbit appears out of a hat and jobs are good and there's a signing ceremony and it's all right in the end from those who want to see a deal. I don't think this time we can be as certain that that plays out like that, because the deadline in a fortnight at the end of the year is real. There's no scope for it being kicked back further down the line, and the difference this time is the UK is not a member of the club. The UK is on the outside and has bottom lines and a government with a sizable majority populated at its top by committed Brexiteers who've always believed in the project, unlike the Theresa May government's senior figures. And there is every chance, I think, now that, yes, there might be a last-minute deal, and there is also every chance that there might not be, and that there might be a no-deal Brexit. And when Michael Gove, who is close to all of this, says, as he did yesterday, that the likelihood of a deal is less than 50%, I don't think we can look at that and say, oh yes, it's just the theatrics, it'll be all right in the end. It may well be. If you want a deal, that may be where we end up. But equally possible, and in the view of Michael Gove, more than equally possible, is that this is a no-deal Brexit.
Well, the devil seems to be in the detail. When you talk about the state aid, for example, and whether it's got a EU flag on it or not, it does seem that the British side and no doubt the EU side are having to look at every sort of permutation of the small print, the kind of thing that we never do when we go online and it says, look, you're signing up to this. If you want to go onto Google or whatever, we just click, yeah, fine, let's move on. Whereas governments, particularly when there is so much at stake, have to look at every single permutation of this. And that's not, partly when you talk about permutations, it's one person's permutation is the other person's clear mandate, isn't it?
Yeah. I had you as an assiduous reader of those terms and conditions, Dotun, when you were writing to me online. I can just imagine you there with the old biro going, hang on a minute, I'm not sure of that on page 19. I'm not doing this.
Life is much too short, particularly when they force you to update it every single week.
Oh, yeah.
Come on now.
No, exactly. No, clearly, the psychology around approaching a deal like this is important. Are you read that thing that says, yes, I've read this and I've clicked here, or are you not? But then also there's that sense that given that you are committing to a relationship that, lasts in perpetuity until either side comes along and changes it, then you have to be certain that there is scope for you to do what you might want to do in the future without being whacked by something from the other side that's written somewhere in that small print. And if you, from the EU side, worry that the UK as this new independent player might want to diverge further, and ultimately that's the whole point of Brexit, isn't it? Then you're going to want to ensure that there are stipulations and caveats and stuff written into all of that. That means if the UK is to do that, there is a consequence. But then the UK counters and says, well, hang on a minute, you guys have to recognise what this project is all about, and it is about escaping your orbit. That is the whole point of Brexit. Why would a country leave the European Union? So goes the argument of those who are the true believers in this project and are sitting at the upper levels of government in the UK. Why on earth would you believe in leaving this European club if it wasn't to allow yourself to have the capacity to do stuff in the future, even if you don't want to do it now, that is distinct from what is possible when you're a member? And their argument is, look, the EU still don't get that, either because they are hugely committed to their own project and that notion of ever greater union and all of that, or they are still living in an era where the UK government is led by a reluctant Brexiteer who voted Remain in the first place, i.e. Theresa May, with barely any political authority because she's propped up by, a party in Northern Ireland and is struggling week to week. And of course the reality of Boris Johnson's government now is a million miles from that. And so that's why this is a very, very different situation in all sorts of different ways from some of these Brexit deadlines that come and go that have done exactly that in the past. That's not to say that there might not be a few more deadlines written in pencil and a lowercase d at the beginning that come and go in the next fortnight, but make no mistake, that deadline in 2 weeks' time on New Year's Eve is absolutely real.
And given that, and just on a final point, given that deadline, the deadline that can't be extended, is there any sense that if a deal is reached between now and then, whether it's by Sunday or otherwise, that we don't return to that terms and conditions analogy where, you press, yeah, I agree, but then you realise later on that, hang on, I didn't realise I was agreeing to that. Is there any sense that this won't look like a botched deal if they've been arguing from one side to the other over the past few years, let alone the last few months and weeks? Is there any sense that under pressure like this, under this kind of deadline pressure, it won't be a botched deal?
There is that sense, and you can find that in and around Parliament of MPs who, by the way, have already packed off for their Christmas recess, but with half an expectation that the phone's going to ping at any moment and they're going to be hauled back to Westminster. That if that does happen, that if there is a deal in the next, however many days, you don't need to be this thing, and it'll get through Parliament because Boris Johnson has a massive majority, and there's a compulsion to do it if you've done a deal, because otherwise the alternative is no deal because Parliament didn't get its act together. But the flip side of that is there going to be detailed line by line scrutiny by our Parliament of any deal in the time frame that actually matters, i.e. before it kicks in? Short answer, no, because there isn't sufficient time. So you do in the time 2016. Either those who are committed Brexiteers who fear that the British government might cave in at the last point on, to them, a crucial detail, or someone who was a sceptic of Brexit from the very outset and isn't a great fan of Boris Johnson either, who also might think, look, they're just going to ram this through and we'll discover in March something that, we only got to on page 853 because that's how long it takes to read 852 of the pages. So yeah, there is that absolute concern about that. And equally, there's concern within government about ensuring, as there is on the EU side, by the way, because that's always the nature of these negotiations, that you can sell it to your electorate, who won't have read all of those pages, certainly not on day one, and most, of course, will never read all of them, that it's a good deal and that you've extracted the maximum amount from your perspective out of it, which of course is one of the reasons politically to carry on talking whilst there is still time to talk, because at least in a superficial way, the kind of optics of this, as Westminster likes to call it, how things look, is that if you've talked until the last moment, you have talked long enough to get as much out of it as you possibly can, as opposed to, downing tools before you need to. And I think from the UK side, they will not want to be the side that is seen to walk away if there is even the slither of a chance of getting something out of this, because even though neither side is going to sign up to a deal that they can't live with, failing to do a deal will be roundly seen in the EU, in the UK and around the world as of a colossal failure of politics, because these are talks where, many people will conclude a deal is the rational outcome, and if there's a failure to reach one, then that will have big consequences in terms of how both sides are perceived politically, but also, bluntly, in the short term at least, in the reality of our day-to-day trade with our nearest neighbours.
And I'm sorry to say, but you know what the UK press is like. The moment that there is no deal, they'll be counting the cost of all the time spent in trying to get a deal, and they'll include those fish lunches or dinners as well in the cost of it. It will be embarrassing, to say the very least.
There's a flip side to that same point, though, Dotun, which is that it is entirely possible in that scenario, if we are in a no-deal scenario, that the UK government domestically, if it makes the argument, look, this is why, in their view, the EU was unreasonable, and look what they were asking for 2 weeks before the deal, and we wanted a deal, and we'd have done one if we could have done X, and, you know, suddenly there's issues in the channel over, you know, shipping stuff back and forth, and there's issues with the French fishing boats trying to come into our waters, and the Navy gets deployed and all the rest of it. Yes, it would be chaotic, and it might be disruptive for the relatively small chunks of business that have those direct cross-channel relationships to look after. It'd be massively significant for them, massively significant for some in the agricultural sector suddenly facing colossal tariffs. But it's not impossible that you could see a spike, a bounce in popularity for the Prime Minister if he's making the argument, look, this is tough and this is not ideal, but this is what we're faced with, and you know, we're a proud independent country, and this is what we are willing to do if, you know, the bully boys of the EU are ganging up on us, as you know, some might be inclined to describe them in that circumstance. So that, coupled with the fact that any negativities associated with a no deal, some of which might be sort of drowned out by the kind of COVID reality, you know, that situation isn't necessarily one that, at least in the short term, would instantly rebound on a British government. All that said, both sides still want to do a deal if they can possibly make one work.
Chris Mason there. Now, if you walk into a shop in the French-speaking Canadian city of Montreal, it's possible, even likely, that you'll be greeted with bonjour, hi. It's a sneaky way for the shopkeeper to indicate that French and English is spoken in their establishment, but local francophones want you to say non to this and to turn instead to bonjour, ho. Joey Elias is a Montreal native and a comedian and actor, and he told me the way you'd be greeted now.
Depending on the part of town, you know, you could be in the west part of Montreal on the island, and it's known to be Anglophone. So chances are you'd be greeted with just a hello, and on the east side, it would be bonjour. And I should mention, you know, so many sales reps will pick up on, well, not during COVID, but if you have an accent that is clearly not from Canada or Quebec, they will automatically speak English. So, yeah, that's how you would, you know, get greeted.
Is it fair to say that Quebecois is naturally bilingual?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even as a purebred Anglo myself, I live here knowing that it's a French-first province, and it always will be. But I think right now they're trying to slip in a little French-only province, and that's the issue for a lot of people.
Yeah, this is Le Bloc Québécois, isn't it? They want to make it a French-only province. Why? Why is that important to them in what you've conceded is a bilingual province?
Well, I mean, they've tried, not this particular party, but the Parti Québécois have tried twice unsuccessfully to separate Quebec from the rest of Canada. Where terrorists literally were blowing up mailboxes here in Montreal and across Quebec to save the French language. So that's what they're back at. They really feel that the French language is being suppressed and their culture is being lost.
Well, that is a much bigger question, isn't it? A much more of an existential issue. And I wonder how important language is, and if you can tell the difference between, say, the culture of the east of Quebec or the east of Montreal to the west of Montreal, you know, how much does language play a part in the way that people are?
Oh, it's a huge factor. I mean, they used to call it the two solitudes. And there's a big boulevard called Saint Laurent Boulevard, and that divides the city into east and west. And it used to be like a known fact that no Anglo living in the west should ever cross into the other side of Saint Laurent and vice versa. Now, the city's so multicultural, and Anglos and Francos live no matter where they want. Basically just find a place that they can afford, really. And everybody gets along. It's only, only the government can ruin fun things and good things.
Joey Elias, l'homme de Montréal, alors, il est comédien et oui. Merci, from us. Tu comment? Oui? Do you understand? Thank you to the squad. Merci alors. À tout à l'heure. Au revoir.
On digital, BBC Sounds, smart speaker and online.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
BBC News at 5 o'clock. This is Tom Hourigan. Northern Ireland is to begin a 6-week lockdown from Boxing Day to try to stop the health service being overwhelmed. Some of the toughest measures anywhere in the UK during the coronavirus pandemic. Supermarkets will be ordered to close at 8 p.m. for the first week. British and EU negotiators have issued fresh warnings that a post-Brexit trade deal is not yet within reach as talks continue today. Boris Johnson said Brussels would need to make a significant shift on access to UK fishing waters. The Port of Dover's chief executive Doug Bannister has called for urgent financial support to help ease potential delays as people travelling to France face stricter checks.
The port is as prepared as we can be. We've been at this for 4 years now. I think the most uncertain thing is how prepared is business to trade post 1st of January. There's an aspect of our operation where certainly if we add some additional friction to it, it's going to slow things down. But the critical thing will be is at what point is that a tipping point?
Service offered to victims by Greater Manchester Police gave serious cause for concern. More than 5,000 new jobs are being created in the drive to speed up the UK's broadband networks. More details, here's Rory Ketland-Jones.
The government has told telecoms firms it wants ultra-fast broadband networks to reach every corner of the UK. Openreach says it's recruiting 2,500 people for engineering jobs, and it estimates its construction industry partners will take on 2,800 more. At the moment, the company is extending its full fibre network to 40,000 homes a week. By the end of next year, that will have to rise to around 50,000 if the project is to stay on target.
Officials in Nigeria say more than 300 schoolboys kidnapped from a boarding school in the northwest of the country last week have been released. The children are reportedly in a good condition. Mayani Jones reports.
Although this is undoubtedly good news for the affected families, there's still many unanswered questions.
On Saturday, at 3 o'clock commentary match, Southampton against Manchester City. Plus, updates from around the leagues and grounds. And on Sunday, Spurs take on Leicester. Kick-off 2:15. Then, from 4 4:30, Manchester United against Leeds United. Followed by West Brom versus Aston Villa from 7:15. Then have your say on 606, the UK's biggest football debate.
The Premier League on 5 Live.
Good morning, I'm Fliss Hannah and I'll have Wake Up to Money for you as normal when we'll be talking about Openreach beefing up its staffing to build its full fibre broadband network and how charities are making gains from Tier 3 pub closures. That's at just after past. First up, however, we're going to listen to the second instalment in our new podcast series from Wake Up to Money. Million by 30 with Sean Farrington speaks to people who've achieved that grand figure in a number of ways at a young age.
So I actually started when I was a kid. So when I was 14, I told a story. Basically, I was coming back from school with my friend Kunal Patel. Shout out to him. Actually, I give him all the credit for everything. And we're coming back, and we saw this black. And we looked at each other, and we said, how much does that Benz cost? And at 14, you don't really understand. Was pretty good at maths, and so I started tutoring people maths, and then people started coming to me for chemistry and physics and biology, and I was like, okay, I don't know that, but I'm actually going to go to the different subject teachers and ask them who's the best person at geography, at history, at physics, at chemistry, and then I was that connector in between the two of them. And I think that to me was quite cool, because I think it was at that point that I realized that you could almost live your life without permission. You could almost just kind of go, well, I'm going to invent this thing, And when I realized that, I was like, wow, that's almost a superpower that you have, that you can just think about something, put it into action, think about an idea, and you don't need any real credentials for that. And so that was when I got thinking, and I was like, right, this is cool. Then I did that on the biggest scale at 17 with my second business, Entrepreneur Express. And,
Can I tell you what, I'm just going to stop you there at 17, because I'm still interested in 14-year-old Timothy at that point, because, 500 quid, like you say, I mean, to so many of us at 14, that may as well be 500 million quid, it feels. But is that a reflection on, your upbringing and your awareness of the value of money? Because there are a lot of people out there who 500 quid might be their budget for their Christmas present that they know they're able to work around. So what was it that made you think, blimey, 500 quid's a lot of money?
I was poor. Bog standard. I was poor kid. I grew up. So I was born in Hackney, but then I went to live in Ghana for 10 years. So I lived with my nan in Ghana for 10 years. And then I came back here and I lived with my dad. And we lived in a council flat. It was just him and I. He was very much, what's the word? He was very much a kind of first generation immigrant. So his mode of thinking is survival, right? It's get a good job, play your position, kind of, put food on the table, done, right? So we never had a lot of money per se. And so that kind of really, I guess, put some kind of steely determination in me to think, how actually do I do this? Because I never really even had more than 50 quid, really, if that, at that age. Just because there just wasn't really that around. So that was the reason why. And there was also a kind of competitive element to me, because when we saw the Benz and when we saw it as a £500, and he actually made a bet that I wouldn't see £500 before I turned 18. To me, that was what? Come on.
Who put that bet?
So my friend. So that was really the thing that got me thinking about, how do I make £500 before I turn 18? And so I can buy that Mercedes-Benz. And then that company was going quite well because I was basically the person who was in the middle getting a cut of everything. So I'd connect the two people, I'd connect the, the French tutor with a French student, etc. And it was quite cool because I had this absolutely broke up phone and I had a fake sick notes. So I'd fake a sick notes because when parents were calling me, I needed to have a way to go to the toilet so I could call up the student and say, at 4:30, you've got this thing here, blah, blah, blah. So I faked the sick note. The sick note was basically a thing which I always gave to teachers to let them know the reason why I kept having to go to the toilet so much.
Oh, while you were at school, you were getting these things in class. I see.
Yeah. And so come to think about it, I realized I think this is the first time I've spoken about the sick note. And I can imagine if one of my teachers was listening to this, they'd just be like, what? I remember
or your mates.
means that so for my next business, Entrepreneur Express, which was an online media site, so Business Insider, entrepreneur.com, but it was all around youth entrepreneurship basically. And I was trying to so I started that. It was online and offline, and it was very cool. I used my youth to get interviews with Richard Branson, James Caan, Alan Sugar, heavy hitters. And it was online and offline. And I contacted universities, Cambridge, Oxford, Warwick, LSE, all these places to take the magazine in the next academic year. So that was cool. And that of owning something, because my whole idea was now like, I own the publication, I own the media, I own the IP, I own the assets. And so that was really my first foray into that particular part of the game.
So going back to where we were, the money coming in, I mean, what are we talking here? Whether or not you're 17 years old, what was the flow of money through your business? How much money was ending up in your bank account to be spent each month?
Oh, like 5 figures.
Right, wow.
And then within about 11 months, I got a call, well, not a call, but I got an email from a company in America. At that time, they were called like iHorizon Media. They were actually run by like 2 brothers. And what they were trying to do was build this kind of like media empire where they own really specific niche blogs. And they actually emailed me and they said, hey, we'd love to partner up. And I'm thinking, okay, yeah, partner up, yeah, sure, blah, 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 I don't know. And they said, can you, in preparation for the Skype call, can you send over some stats and all that stuff? And I sent them over some stuff and I was like, and I also own these like Facebook pages, blah, blah, blah. And I remember this very specifically. It was a Friday at like 2 United red shorts. And he got on the call and they said, hey, so we looked at stuff. I was wondering, rather than partnering up, we just like to buy you. Like, we'd like to buy the company. And I was like, well, it was me in my council house working, and then someone was like, yeah, we'd like to do that. And I was just like, whoa, that was amazing.
So let's get back to business. Was that then the next thought process, or did you think, actually, let's get a proper job?
I never really wanted that. Not because I have anything against jobs. Like, I think they're great. And I think, I am forever thankful and grateful to the people who work at my company right now, because without them, we wouldn't be able to have a business. But I think I just once you kind of got a bit of that taste of what it feels to really kind of like to kind of own your life, to kind of go, right, this is what I want to do, and then you just own it. Plus, the other thing is, I don't have any siblings, and so I think part of that had something to do with it. Like, the fact that I didn't have any siblings meant I almost put a lot of pressure on myself to just like be the one who does well, like, because it was almost like, well, that's the only thing there really to do, just to do well.
Why?
I think part of it was, so if I think about my background, so I mentioned earlier that I went to Ghana for 10 years. Now, the reason why is actually, if I hadn't, I would have ended up in foster care, because my dad and my mum, wow, this is the first time that I'm actually talking about this. My dad and my mum they were just not seeing eye to eye at all. And they had, some issues, etc. And so I would have ended up at foster care. And even at like 14, for example, I think that I just had this kind of internal talk to myself that I was like somewhat special. Like, this sounds really bizarre, but I think that you need to kind of have this sense of like you was like you're special in some way. So I just constantly thought like, I'm different, I'm special, I'm different, I'm special. And I looked around at myself, like living in a council estate, living in there, and there's nothing wrong with it, but and he lived in a council estate, but that's cool. But like, this is not the life which I manufactured per se. Like, this is not the life that I designed for myself. And so I kind of realized, well, actually, I can design my own life. And then this was the reason why I then started like business and marketing and all that stuff.
So is this the first time, our podcast is Million by 30, And I've been wondering at what stage of your journey all of a sudden the first million figure starts being talked about, whatever it might be, whether it, I guess, clicks wise and views wise, you're sort of well past that, are you at that point? But in terms of financial terms, are we on that spectrum? How does a company get valued? What were they talking?
No, so that was 6 figures. That was 6 figures. And so that was like, okay, well, that was when I was like, right, now this is what like real money is, which fits quite well into this podcast, that you kind of go, first business, I was doing 4 figures. While I was running second business, I was doing 5, then it sold for 6. And then this business, Fanbytes, is like, 7, close to 8. And then the next business, 9, and then the next business, 10.
Timothy, in terms of then, you're looking at Fanbytes. Give us a sentence what Fanbytes actually does. I mean, we're all using social media all the time now. TikTok is on everybody's phone when it wasn't a year ago. What is it that you guys do?
So what we do is we help brands to run social media campaigns to reach Gen Z audiences. So we have influencers and communities on TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, YouTube, and then we help brands to collaborate with those guys, but also create content and distribute it on social media. So brands like the government, Huawei, Samsung, BBC, Deliveroo, quite a lot of these guys come to us in order to help them to reach that younger audience through social media campaigns.
So this reminds me of the question I had written down from your 14-year-old story that I was going to apply to Fanbytes. So one common theme in the businesses you run is you're a middleman.
Yeah. Yes.
What's that about, and why, and how's that worked with Fanbytes?
So with Fanbytes, so we have 3 parts of the business. We have the part where we basically connect and create the 2, but the other ones, owing to my omen basically of owning the media and owning the stuff, we also have a talent business where we exclusively manage the biggest talent on social media. And then we have another division of the business called Byte House, where we brought all of them to create content in one house, which we own and operate and everything else. So it is a combination of those 2 things. Basically, Fanbytes is almost going, take what I learned at 14 and connecting people, and then take what I learned at 17 and like owning the IP and the media, and then bring them together in one nice package.
And which do you prefer, being the middle man, whether it's profitability in a business for you yourself or owning the lot?
So I hate when people give this answer, but my answer is both. Because you can achieve scale by being the middleman and scaling, but you generate more value as a company by owning the media.
Interesting. And so the final question on this, I mean, what's the plan for Fanbytes? Would you like to be mega worth hundreds of millions, billions, or are you thinking if the right price came in again, sell, move on to the next one?
Well, I think one of the things is that if you think about where we're going and you think about, you look at the biggest companies in the world like WPP and all the assets, they don't really have a thing just for Gen Z. So I think Fanbytes can actually be the WPP for Gen Z, like the biggest person or the biggest agency, the biggest group you can think about, where if you think Gen Z, you think those guys. That's where I think we are trying to go, and that's where I think we can go.
Incredible. I mean, it says something, doesn't it, about what your family did for you, moving you all around the world to keep things going, that you can now be here with Fanbytes. I mean, do you have to pinch yourself sometimes? What do your family think?
So my mum doesn't know anything about what I do. Sometimes my aunties are like Ghana and Germany. So like I was recently on like BBC, I was BBC News, and I was on like Bloomberg for talking about something, and they'll like message me and they'll send me a picture. Timo, I saw you on the news. And I'm like, yeah. But they don't know what I do. Like, so I think at one point my auntie, or my grandma actually, like, because I said, I do stuff on social media, she thought that I own Facebook. I was like, I do say, oh, so you own it? I was like, no, that's a different guy. I think they are proud. They're impressed. They yeah.
What can I ask about your dad?
Yeah, so my dad actually passed away like 4 years ago, and I think that also what gave me this extra, like, there's a whole kind of like story behind that. But he passed away then, and I think that it kind of gave me this extra, like, just internal fortitude, this internal like just steely determination to do well. Because part of it, he was around when like Fanbikes was just a bit of an idea and we're kind of like kicking things out, and he really wanted it to do well, etc. But he was just never around to see it. And I often kind of jokingly say to myself, sometimes I like win awards or something like that, and I always say, it'd be cool if, even though he didn't understand it, to be able to like go up, get an award with him, and he doesn't have any clue, but he's just like, yeah, great, because he passed away due to a stroke. And so like that really got to me, just like being in the same house as him and then all that stuff, like that really got to me. So much to the point where I don't think I'm quite over it, and sometimes I know, and I see myself acting with a level of like obsession about doing well, or about business, or about doing stuff, which I can see is maybe other people who work with me may not have that, but they're not necessarily coming from that position of like a real internal need to do well in life. That's how, like the company, we've, made several million. It's now valued in the millions. I'm worth millions. Yeah.
So when was the moment where actually you went from, great, you had this business before that you sold, we're talking 5 figures and a little bit of 6 figures, but that's a big leap again when all of a sudden you're talking about 7 figures, your business is worth that, your value yourself is worth that, your potential is even more than that. Was there a day where you sat down with your colleagues and you thought, right, we're off?
Yeah, this was in early 2018. Like the business actually made this. The business went past its first million in the second year. So in 2018 is when we actually passed that. And by that time, the value of the business from a valuation perspective was more than that. So I'd love to say it was like a moment where I was like, and then it happened. I was like, wow. But I think it was pretty like, oh, that's cool. Because even though and feel, so a couple million doesn't seem like a thing. Then you think, onto the next one. But I did, when we did hit that number, I did kind of feel a bit, again, like going back to my dad thing, like I did think it'd be cool to like come home and say, hey, we just like passed 1 million, or we've just done this, or we've just done that. But, you know, such is life.
Timothy, I mean, blimey, that's quite a journey from just that pottering past a Merc.
Yeah.
Timothy, thank you for that. That was great. I really enjoyed that. I mean, we could have gone much longer, but it's just fascinating. There's so much that people will take from that, and I really appreciate your sort of your candidness as well.
Thanks very much. That was Timothy Almu, Chief Executive of FanBytes, talking to Sean Farrington about how he built his multi-million pound marketing business. It's 5:29.
On digital, BBC Sounds, smart speaker and online.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
Let's get the headlines this morning. Ministers in Northern Ireland say that the NHS would face unprecedented strain in January without a new 6-week coronavirus lockdown after Christmas. From Boxing Day, pubs and restaurants will be restricted to selling takeaways, and non-essential shops and close contact services like hair salons will close. Supermarkets will also have to shut at 8 p.m. during the first week of the lockdown. A long-running cyber attack targeting government departments in the United States has now affected the 2 agencies managing the country's nuclear stockpile. Investigations into the hack are continuing. More than 5,000 new jobs are being created in the drive to speed up the UK's broadband networks. BT's Openreach division says it needs the extra staff to give millions more homes and businesses access to ultra-fast internet connections by the end of the decade. Sony has stopped selling one of the most highly anticipated video games of all time, just days after its release, following a deluge of complaints that it keeps crashing and freezing. The company is also offering refunds to people who've already purchased Cyberpunk 2077 for the PlayStation. Its creator, CD Projekt, has apologised. Now with the sports news, it's Andy Barwell.
In their 3-2 success away at the bottom club Sheffield United. It was a 10th straight away win in the league. Burnley moved out of the relegation places with a point from their goalless draw at Aston Villa. The Liverpool boss Jurgen Klopp retained the title as the best men's coach at the annual FIFA Football Awards. Tottenham Hotspur's Son Heung-min got the best goal prize. The Bayern Munich striker Robert Lewandowski beat Cristiano Ronaldo and Lionel Messi to the Men's Player Award. The England and Manchester City defender Lucy Bronze was the best women's player. Russia's ban from major world sporting events for doping violations has been cut from 4 years to 2. They will still miss next year's rescheduled Olympics and Paralympics, as well as the 2022 Football World Cup in Qatar. And more than 100 former players have joined the legal process against the Rugby Football Union for alleged negligence with regards to concussion injuries in the sport.
Thanks, Andy. And let's get the weather for today. Sarah Keith-Lucas is at the BBC Weather Centre.
Good morning. Our spell of mild and unsettled mid-December weather is set to continue. Over the next 24 hours, we're going to see more rain moving in from the west, bringing a risk of flooding in places, particularly for South Wales, where the Met Office have issued an amber weather warning for heavy rain that's valid from 9 a.m. this morning right through the course of today. So let's start off with today's forecast across all of Wales, the western half of England, into the southwest of Scotland too. Well, this morning is cloudy and breezy, but we're going to see an area of rain pushing in from the southwest, moving across the whole region by about midday. This rain is going to be heavy at times, about 20 to 30 millimetres quite widely, so enough to cause flooding and travel disruption, especially for South Wales, where there could be 100 millimetres of rain over the highest ground. The winds are also going to be a feature, with gusts up to 60 miles per hour around exposed coasts, and it's going to be another very mild day with top temperatures 13 or 14 degrees. Across the eastern half of England and for northern and eastern Scotland, well, today starts with some drizzly showers in the southeast, which should fade away to leave a lot of dry weather. There will be a few breaks in the cloud, and it's going to be a breezy day with gusts of 40 miles per hour. There'll be some patchy outbreaks of rain arriving during this afternoon and lasting into the evening as well, and it's another mild day with temperatures of 14 or even 15 degrees. Now, lastly today,